Hey everyone, what is going on? What is going on? My name is Curtis Brooks. I am a men's life coach. I help men communicate their way to healthy relationships. Guys, this is going to be a wonderful broadcast. I'm super excited about this broadcast because it is absolutely one of my favorite topics to to talk to men about because a lot of times we as men, we have anger issues. Yeah, that's the way it is. But today's broadcast is from fury to freedom, how men can overcome anger and heal. So that is one of the challenges that us as men have with understanding that healing needs to take place, and oftentimes without that healing, oftentimes without that healing, it absolutely affects all kinds of different things. But before we get into our topic of discussion, I want to let you know that I am on three platforms. That's multiple platforms. I'm on Facebook, also on YouTube and LinkedIn. So LinkedIn comments, they do not show up on my screen here. I have no comments at this time, but they will show up in the app on a separate device here. So I have my handy phone here as my separate device to check out those comments. So if you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to insert those questions. Ask away. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have as it relates to men and their anger and how we deal with that anger and how we can actually overcome that anger and heal. So interesting enough, I did not want to use the word conquer, and for reasons. The word conquer implies that you're wrestling with something, and though as men we are at times having to feel like we're wrestling with something, absolutely, in different capacities, not just anger, but having to deal with our emotions. We can absolutely feel like we're wrestling with something. But I didn't use the word conquer because so much of our history has been made up of the word conquer. So in this particular, or the context of this conversation, we're looking at the word overcome because that's what we as men we need to do is overcome the anger with understanding. So not with that conquer mentality, whereas we're wrestling with something, we've got to subdue something and we've got to bring something under submission. And the likelihood of that thing which we're trying to bring under submission has the propensity to come up again and come up again, and then we're battling and fighting that same thing over and over throughout the course of our life. No, that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about overcoming this anger issue. And the way we overcome this anger issue is with understanding. So that being said, as I always like to do, well, actually, before we even get started with the conversation, as I mentioned, I'm on YouTube, also on Facebook and LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, you can find me under Curtis Brooks, also under Life Coach for Men. That's Life Coach, the number 4 men. Again, Life Coach, number 4 men on LinkedIn. And also on YouTube, Life Coach for Men, spelled out as it sounds, Life Coach for Men, or Life Coach, the number 4 and men on LinkedIn. Again, Life Coach, number 4 men on LinkedIn. So that being said, how I always, in most cases, like to get started is with definitions. I'm kind of a wordsmith. I'm a wordsmith nerd, I guess. But I like to get started with words. And the word I'm looking at right now is fury, Fury. And its definition is unrestrained or violent anger, rage, passion, or the like. And another definition was violently, intensely. So there we have the definition. And before we even get further into this, I want to talk about the the roots of anger. The roots of anger. One, the roots of anger being unspoken expectations. And oftentimes, and I would probably say this is not just a man thing, but people as a whole in relationships or out of relationships, on the job or wherever, life, we have a tendency to have these expectations. We all have them. We all have them. Whether they're low on our scale, or low on the radar, we all have those expectations. But what happens a lot of times is that those unspoken expectations, or those expectations are unspoken, meaning that oftentimes we don't share those expectations. They're unspoken, and they're unspoken for a reason. Here's the reason why they're unspoken. Oftentimes because we don't want to be met with disappointment. And when we share those expectations with someone and they don't meet those expectations, perhaps going on a job interview or expecting a certain amount of money and you don't get it or something like that. And so oftentimes we can keep those things to ourselves in the hope of getting them. But the reality of it is that if no one knows what your expectation is, it can absolutely be difficult for someone to meet that expectation. And I mean, come on, let's face it, that just makes sense. And I've absolutely have been in that space where I've had unspoken expectations for the likes of just not wanting to be upset, not wanting to be angry within my own self because I did not share those expectations with the person, or be it a job interview or in a relationship or with your kids, or it doesn't matter. But I've absolutely been there. So the root of anger can absolutely be unspoken expectations. The root of anger can be expectations that are not met, meaning that you have spoken, you have shared your expectations, be it on the job, expecting a certain amount of money with your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend, whomever. You've shared these expectations with your children, and for whatever reason, those expectations go unmet. So now we're not talking about unspoken. We're talking about those expectations that you shared with a person. This is what I'm expecting. And that person, for whatever reason, they don't follow through. They don't show up on time. They're not where they're supposed to be at. And these things can absolutely cause us to be angry about something or someone. We've got my third point is unfairly accusations towards us that are unfair. Or in our own hearts, we feel that they're not justified. Someone said something about you that was not true. Malicious intent to smear your name, to defame your name or your character, being mistreated unfairly. All these things now are roots of anger. And not necessarily the root of anger, but they can cause anger. They can be an extension of anger. And we're going to get further into this anger. Again, often this anger that men are dealing with. And obviously, it's not just men who are dealing with anger, it's women too. But I am a men's life coach, and so we're talking about men today. So that being said, the environment that we're in. Perhaps we don't like the environment. Again, I think that comes with those either spoken expectations or unspoken expectations to our environment. Our financial issues, financial situations, not having enough money, or just being, or at least feeling like you're repeatedly in a situation over and over, not making enough money in your job. Again, financial issues. Can't make the bills from one month to the next month. Again, financial issues. So, we've got poor social or family situations, meaning that you and your family aren't getting along. And it's not just family, but just socially. Maybe we feel but maybe we feel awkward about something or situation. Again, that leads me to my next point, my last bullet point here. That is poor communication or insufficient communication, communication skills, I should say. And I like to see, for us to understand that communication is a skill. And therefore, more than just a skill, every workman or every person that's skilled at a particular craft, each person has tools that they would use for a particular craft or whatever they may be working on. Maybe a person's a craftsman, a wood craftsman or something of that sort. Each person has tools, man or woman, but each person has their tools. Maybe a person's a photographer. They've got different cameras, different lenses, but they have tools for their trade. And it's no different with communication. Tools for the trade, tools to get the job done, tools to speak precisely to what is going on, to what we're dealing with. So that's why I said insufficient communication or poor communication. And so here's what happens with the poor communication piece of it. And now we're diving more into this anger that men often feel. Because men have a tendency to be poor communicators. And it doesn't mean that we can't communicate, but we're not very good at communicating. And the reason why we're not very good at communicating. Now, let me clarify this. When I say that we're not good at communicating, what I'm meaning is that we're not good at communicating how we feel. And it does not mean that we are communicating how we feel each and every time we're talking to someone, or it has to be some really kumbaya moment every time we talk. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is men, we sometimes lack the communication skills, the tools, the manner of expressing ourselves in a way that other people can understand, and namely women. And I think it's interesting because I think with men we have this communication code, for lack of a better word. I think we oftentimes we know what each other's saying, but I think to get down to the nuts and bolts of what we are saying, it takes more time. It takes opportunity for us to be in tune with who we are. And that means that we're more than just the job that we're working. We're more than our wealth. But what happens, unfortunately, is that we connect ourselves with our wealth. We connect ourselves with the very job that we're working on. We connect ourselves with that vehicle, be it a nice Lamborghini or Porsche or whatever, it doesn't matter. We connect ourselves with things. And so when things happen to fall apart, life, what happens to us? We have the propensity to be angry about whatever it might be. We have the propensity to really disengage from life because we have placed so much weight on those things. Excuse me. And when we place so much weight on these different things, again, outside of getting to know thyself, these things are what we call perishables. The car will rust at some point, it will get old, or perhaps, unfortunately, maybe get in have an accident or something. That would be absolutely unfortunate, but life happens. The house needs a new roof. It's a wonderful home, but it's now time for a new roof. And what happens is when these things fall apart, we as men, we have a tendency to fall apart with them. Even in the likes of relationships now, even in the likes of marriage, even in the likes of a significant other, boyfriend and girlfriend, we have a tendency to fall apart with it. We have a tendency to break that. We have a tendency to break with the very thing that is broken. Perhaps, again, the relationship. Many of us as men have been in relationships, or are in a relationship, or perhaps are seeking a relationship. But maybe your anger is preventing you from getting close to that person. Maybe your anger is preventing you from being in a relationship. Maybe you don't want to be in a relationship because you know your anger. You know that you have anger issues. Well, it's that if that's you, as a man, I want to let you know that I absolutely understand. I absolutely understand. I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, the hat, been there. So here's what I had to do, though. Here's what I had to do. I'm going to tell you a quick story, a personal story. Many, many years ago, I was dating someone, and she had decided that she wanted to extend our relationship. I'll put it that way. She wanted to bring someone else in a relationship, or she wanted to have a relationship outside of the relationship that we were having. And that obviously made me very, very angry. I didn't like that. I felt some kind of way. Yeah, I absolutely did. And rather than deal with it, because I felt like I couldn't communicate with her and talk with her, because of it wasn't my inability to communicate. I didn't have a receiver on the other end, or at least that's what I felt like. Or perhaps I wasn't communicating, or I was too angry to perhaps even to communicate. It could have been one or two or three or more of those things. But here's what was going on. Yeah, I was absolutely angry. And because of my anger, I was led down this path that I began to abuse her mentally and emotionally with words, saying things that I should absolutely not have said. Man, I'm a long way from that now. Thank you, God. Absolutely long way from that. So I'm sharing that for men to let you know that I absolutely understand. And with anger, yeah, we all deal with it differently. We all have our devices or vices, whatever you want to call it. Some will choose alcohol, some will choose drugs, some will choose verbal abuse, mental and emotional abuse, and others will choose yet something else, or physical abuse. And to be honest, it absolutely, even for myself, it could have led to that. It didn't. So I'm not necessarily speaking about whether it's fortunate or unfortunate. Absolutely not. For any of us, any kind of abuse, it will absolutely lead to what I call a sacrifice. And let me explain that. Any kind of abuse, meaning that abuse or that thing which you're feeding, it will absolutely require you to continue feeding it. So I want to read you this statement. Looking at my comments here on LinkedIn, I want to read you this statement here that I wrote the other day as far as preparing for this. It was, every living thing must be fed to stay alive. Every living thing must be fed to stay alive. And so for me, the very thing that was living on the inside of me was anger. It was anger. And I'm sharing this with you to let you know that I'm no different from any other man who has dealt with anger, who may be still dealing with anger. So I'm not any different. But I decided not to conquer anger because I knew that trying to conquer something was a losing battle. The word in itself, conquers, to conquer something means to place something under your feet, to overthrow something. But it also means that very thing which, in that moment that I'm having the wherewithal and the strength to conquer that thing, it has the propensity to come back again, yet even stronger. So when I wrote this comment, everything that is living must be fed to stay alive. So it was no different from the anger that was on the inside of me. That very thing absolutely was alive, preventing the very life that I was trying to attain. The very things that I'm speaking to you now. I wasn't always in this place. So the very things that I'm speaking to you now were lying subject or feeling as if it was conquered. The anger had conquered the very life that I was trying to live, the very thing I was trying to promote, the very person that I wanted to be. And the anger had me yet on a different course. And man, I said some absolutely awful things. Awful things. I have absolutely, yes, made amends with those things and the person who I said them to at that time. So I'm here to share with you, men, I absolutely understand your anger. I understand the place where you may be coming from. I understand the place where you may have been. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your anger does not look like my anger. It doesn't matter if your vice or device was alcohol and mine was this and yours was this, or yours was drugs and mine was. It doesn't matter. Anger is anger, and it comes from a place of deficiency. And that deficiency, I want to finish this story really quick here. So here's how I overcame this anger issue that I had. I remember and dealing with this anger. Again, the person that I was dating at the time, she would absolutely be hurt. I was hurt that I would say such a thing, and no one would ever even think that I would say such a thing. No one knew me like that, and I didn't even know myself like that. But I was angry, and it led me to a place. Absolutely, yes, it led me to a place. I use that word intentionally. It led me to a place of searching because I didn't like the person that I was. I didn't like that person. And I, I despised that person because what I presented to the world, to my family, and to friends, to colleagues, co-workers, all those who knew me, as an uncle, as a brother, what I presented was something completely different from what I was witnessing. So I had to fix that thing. I remember maybe months before, maybe even years before that, maybe a couple years before that, I was working on a podcast, and uh, my son recorded a outro for me, and the outro went something like, "Words are powerful, so spend them wisely." And I love that outro. But I remember listening to the podcast, the entire podcast. The podcast was The Power of Words. And when I listened to that podcast, I remember weeping, crying like a baby. I was hurt. I was dissatisfied with myself because that person who voice I was listening to through that MP or that audio, that podcast I was listening to, that person who I was listening to was the person that I was. It was a person that I knew myself to be. It was a person that I presented to the world, my brothers and sisters, as an uncle, to my nieces, to my nephews, to the world, to my colleague. It was the person, that voice I was listening to was a person that I wanted to be. So here I was dealing with those unmet expectations, as I mentioned to you earlier, a root of anger, unspoken as well. Environment, financial issues, social, and a lot of the things I just read to you earlier in regards to the root of anger. Yeah, I was dealing with those things. So as I'm listening to this podcast, the tears came down my face and I just wept like a baby. And I remember going to her, the woman I was dating at the time, and apologizing. And she said, "Oh, whatever, I'm just going to do it again." And I was honestly sorry. And yet I did it again. And I did it again. Each time I had to apologize. Not necessarily at this point, I had to go beyond what I was expecting for her to receive. I couldn't expect her to receive my apology like I wanted, because here I was, I kept stumbling over the same thing. But it was this one day, and I couldn't tell you what day. I didn't mark it on my calendar. The only thing I can say to you is this one day I showed up the person, that voice that I heard on the podcast. I showed up as that person. And interesting enough, me and this particular woman, we continued dating for years after. But here I now was showing up as that person who I said that I was. That's the person I was. I showed up. And I was absolutely proud of myself because it wasn't something that I had to conquer. It was something that I had to understand. It was something that I had to overcome. And it was something eventually that I healed from. So I'm here to share with men, and for the women who will share this replay, and for the women who love us, is that it's absolutely possible for your husband, boyfriend, your significant other, it's absolutely possible for him to heal. It's absolutely possible for him to be that person who you expect him to be and who he knows himself to be. It's absolutely possible. But here's the other piece that I didn't tell you, is that even while I had stumbled over and over and over, the desire had never left me. The desire to change had never left me. There was something on the inside of me, no different from other men that are out there. There's something on the inside of you that absolutely is desiring to change. But perhaps you've stumbled like I did at one time. Perhaps they're not accepting your apology because you've apologized over and over. You have tried to make amends and they don't want to accept your apology. And you're perhaps even at that point of halfway throwing in the towel and giving up. And really almost kind of making it personal, because if they're not accepting your apology, well, what's it all worth now? Well, I'm going to tell you what's it worth. It's worth your life. It's absolutely worth your life. Anger has a way of coming in as something that seems so small and yet seemingly like not a big deal, but yet, in fact, it comes in like a thief in the night to steal, kill, and destroy everything that you put your hands to. Interesting enough, anger, much like anything else that works contrary to a understanding, contrary to a right direction, or walking in a right direction, contrary to the very information that has come to set you free, has come to heal you, anger wants to work in the opposite direction. It wants to have you going backwards. So then it creeps in or creeps up as something very small. But yet, it tries to strangle the very life out of you and I, as it did with me at one time, or at least it attempted to. And in many attempts, it had succeeded. But your desire has to be stronger than that which you are dealing with, the anger. And here's something else about anger. Anger that you and I have dealt with, or perhaps the individual, you're still dealing with it. Your anger knows you better than you know yourself. I did a video not too long ago. Excuse me. I did a video not too long ago. I was talking about a protagonist and antagonist in a way of a movie or a story that's been written. The protagonist is the person that everybody's rooting for, but in some cases, the antagonist is the person that everyone's rooting for. But in the way of our anger, the anger is the antagonist. And that anger knows the protagonist, knows us, knows the very thing that we're trying to go after, knows our hopes and knows our dreams. The antagonist, acting as anger, knows us better than we know ourselves. In most cases, as men, we know the jobs that we have. We know them like the back of our hand. So whether you are a leader, whether you are a clerk, I like to say from suits to sweatsuits. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Whatever your role is, whatever your position is, anger likes to come in there like a thief in the night. And it likes to try and strangle the very life that is in us as men. And when I speak of men, I'm not speaking of men coming from a space of, oh, I'm a man. No. It's more than that. Again, it's not coming from a place of conquering something. It's coming from a place of understanding. It's coming from a place of overcoming something. It's coming from a place of acquiring the knowledge. And really quick here, I want to give you a story, a really quick story. And I'm going to share another story with you. Wow, look at the time. I tell you, man. Years ago as a kid, many years ago now as a kid, I always wanted to know how it rained. That was such a mystery to me. How does it rain? Where does the rain come from? And I'm sure many kids may have asked that. I can't say all kids, but a lot of kids may have asked that question. So here I was as a kid, just looking in amazement. I said, wow, God, that's interesting. I don't even know if I said God at the time, but I was just marveling at how does it rain? And I remember well into my adulthood. Matter of fact, I'm in my 30s at some point in my 30s. And I remember I went to school for flight dispatch. And just a real quick description of the job, it's essentially what we call, or people will often call, a pilot on the ground. So we're helping the pilots as they're flying different routes. So I'm actually, giving them route information or helping them to navigate through weather and things of that nature. So that was the kind of work that I was doing at one time. But anyways, I took this class to become a flight dispatcher. And in this class, we had to learn about weather. And the more and more I learned about this weather and learned that what was a mystery to me at one time, I'm trying to keep this short because I know we're almost on time here, but what was a mystery to me at one time was the information that was missing. I didn't have the information. And the more this information was revealed to me, the more that thing that was seeming like a mystery was no longer a mystery. That which was so mystical was in fact not very mystical. It was something that men and people, perhaps you, have known for years. But here I was in my 30s coming into this marvel about God and just how these things work. But at the same time, that information, or at least that thing that I was inquiring of for so many years, and to be honest, I never mentioned that to anybody. I never told that story. I mean, I've told that story since, but up until I had found out the nuts and bolts of how it rained and the clouds take up the moisture and things of that nature, up until that point, I never shared that story with anybody. And so here I was walking around with this question, this very thing that was this seeming like a mystery in me that was building up. And here I was, demystifying the mystery, or that which was mystical, breaking it down, and wow, that's not such a mystery. That's how God had intended it. That's what it was supposed to be doing. So here's my point. Here's my point. With our anger as men, it is the same way. That which what we're dealing with, the anger, it has to come from somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. And as long as that anger is of a mystery to us, if you will, and appearing as if it's a mystery. Now, we know that we're dealing with it. But interesting enough, this anger has a way of coming up at the most inopportune moments. And when it comes up, I read the definition to you earlier. And when this anger comes up, it has a way of coming up as a force that is unrestrained. Violently, perhaps. Rage, passionate about what you feel because you know you're right. And you're deserving to be angry because you know you're right. That passion. But that passion is working in the wrong direction. And so, until we as men get the information to debunk or to demystify this anger that we're dealing with, we will forever be indebted to it. It will perhaps remain a mystery, not knowing where it comes from, but in fact, it does come from somewhere. But if we're not careful, that anger that we as men are dealing with, it can appear as if it's hidden. And here we are ready to start a new relationship, thinking that we're ready. Oh, I'm ready. I haven't had an anger issue. I haven't had a blowout or a situation or a stumble or whatever the case it might be. I haven't had this issue come up. But yet, only the anger, lying dormant, or at least appearing to lie dormant, as if it's not there. Oh, it's not there anymore. No. But it has a way of coming up out of hiding, because you and I know that life, relationships, things that people say, things that people do, things that our kids do, things that our spouses do, things that our girlfriends, significant others do. Life, it will press those buttons, guys. And at some point, we have to be, as men, prepared to deactivate that button. Not destroy the button, because we've conquered it. But we have to be prepared to deactivate that button. Curtis, how do we deactivate that button? Glad you asked. With understanding. With understanding. The last thing I'm going to leave you with, check out the comments here, so give me just a second here. Absolutely. Lenora says over on YouTube, she says, I'm going to put her message on the screen here. She says, that's good. Earlier I was talking about desire, having a desire to change. And so as men, after we have stumbled, and we will stumble, change doesn't happen overnight. That was probably one of the most difficult things that I did, having to overcome that thing. That battle with my mouth just blah, 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 saying awful things. But yet, even as I stumbled, I was still as a man who was desiring to change, and that desire must be there. It must be there because yeah, you're going to stumble. We're not going to change overnight, guys. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And by yeah, all intents and purposes, maybe a miracle can happen. Absolutely, and maybe it can happen quicker than you're anticipating it. It can happen, but yes, absolutely. As Lenora has said, you will need that desire for sure. And she says, fantastic show. Thank you, Lenore. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. So the last thing I want to leave with you is I was reading in my time for study and preparing for this conversation. I was reading my Bible, and there's a scripture in the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 8:1 and 2. And it talks about the letter of the law. And what they're referring to, I'll give you more understanding on that. What they're referring to is the Ten Commandments. You know, the Ten Commandments. I'm sorry about that. So they're talking about that the Ten Commandments, how they were written. They were called. It was like a letter. It was a letter from God to us as His creation. And the letter, as Apostle Paul is speaking of in his text here, again, 1 Corinthians 8 and chapter 8, verses 1 through 2, he's speaking to the church of Corinth. And he is trying to mitigate a conversation that they're having, because there's some people who want to adhere to the Ten Commandments, the letter of the law. And Paul, in his wisdom, in the infinite wisdom that he gets from God, he knows that the letter, the Ten Commandments that God had put together, that He had created for mankind, it pointed to a specific time, and during that specific time, it was to let us know that without some kind of boundaries, if you will, some kind of rules or guidelines, if you will, that we were sinful creatures. But the Spirit, as Paul goes on to say, and I want you to try and look into that again. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 2. Paul goes on to say that the Spirit gives life. So there was the letter who came to. There was the letter that came to show man of their sinful nature. And so that knowledge alone, without compassion, he goes on to say that it just puffs a man up. It makes us feel haughty and proud and prideful about whatever it may be. Or something along the lines of, I did good today. There were great deeds. I succeeded. I helped the old lady across the street. So Paul understood that in his wisdom, but he also understood that again, that letter of the law, those Ten Commandments, is pointing to a specific time. But now came a time through Jesus that the Spirit now, the letter had to come with understanding now. The letter of the law now has to come with understanding. So with the letter of the law came the Spirit. And that Spirit was through Jesus. And so through His Spirit, He did not abolish the letter of the law, but He came with the letter of the law in a Spirit that brought life. Through a Spirit, through a level of understanding and compassion that brought life. So He did not come to conquer. He did not do away with the Ten Commandments, but He brought that which was written for a specific time. He brought it with Him to share. But yet, He would be the embodiment. He would be the very spirit of that which God had written to give life to men, to you and I. So that's why, guys, gentlemen, it's absolutely important for us to make a decision to overcome our anger and heal rather than conquer this anger thing and find ourselves battling with this thing back and forth, continually stumbling over the same thing. That's not what we want. So, that being said, guys, don't think we have any more questions. Nothing on LinkedIn. So, again, for those, the individual who is on LinkedIn, actually, it might be me, but in any event, for those who will check out the replay, please do so. Once more, I'm streaming to 3 platforms: Facebook on my personal page under Curtis Brooks, also on YouTube, Life Coach for Men on YouTube, and on LinkedIn, Life Coach for Men. That's Life Coach number 4 Men on LinkedIn, and also Curtis Brooks on LinkedIn. So you'll find me there. You'll find this replay there as well. So make sure that you share this replay out. If you love us as men, and yes, we fault it sometimes. Absolutely, we do. But if you want to be a part of the solution, share this message with someone that you care about. Even your foes, you can share this message. They'll get a good teaching, a good understanding out of it. So again, guys, we thank you. We will talk with you later and say ciao for now, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.